The compound was alive with laughter and the aroma of jollof rice when my world shattered into 1,000 pieces. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those typical family gatherings where both sides of our families came together to share a meal. I had spent the morning cooking, making sure everything was perfect, the way I always did. My mother-in-law sat at the head of the table, fanning herself with a church bulletin, while my own parents chatted amiably with Cola's brothers. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even, until my husband stood up and cleared his throat. "I have an important announcement to make," Cola said, his voice carrying across the dining room with the confidence of a man who believed he was about to share wonderful news. I looked up from arranging the plantains on a serving dish, a smile already forming on my lips. Perhaps he had gotten the promotion at work, or maybe we were finally going on that trip to Dubai he had been promising. In 3 weeks' time, I will be taking a second wife. It is time to expand our family in the proper traditional way. The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I couldn't process what I had heard. My hands froze mid-motion, and I felt the room tilt slightly. But what came next was even more devastating than the announcement itself. The room erupted in applause. His mother ululated with joy. His brothers clapped him on the back, and even some members of my own family nodded approvingly. They were celebrating. They were celebrating the news that my husband was replacing me. I stood there, the serving spoon trembling in my hand, watching this man I had loved for 7 years bask in the approval of our families. 7 years of standing by him when his business nearly collapsed. 7 years of supporting his dreams while mine gathered dust. 7 years of being told I was his partner, his queen, his everything. And now, in front of everyone we knew, he had casually announced my replacement like he was ordering a new car. But I didn't scream. I didn't throw the plantains or collapse in tears or make the scene that was building inside my chest like a volcano. Instead, something cold and hard crystallized in my heart, something that felt like ice but burned like fire. I carefully set down the serving spoon, smoothed my wrapper, and walked calmly to where Cola stood, still receiving congratulations. I placed my hand gently on his arm, and the room fell silent, everyone watching to see how the first wife would react. I looked directly into his eyes, those same eyes that had promised me forever on our wedding day, and asked in a voice so steady it surprised even me, "Cola, are you absolutely sure this is your final decision?" He smiled at me, that same condescending smile I had seen increasingly frequently in recent months, the smile of a man who believed he had already won. "Yes, my dear. It is done. The arrangements are already made." I nodded slowly, still smiling, and returned to the kitchen while the celebration continued behind me. Inside, my old life was burning to ashes, but no one could see the smoke. Later that evening, after all the guests had gone home and the house fell into an uncomfortable silence, Cola cornered me in the hallway. The mask of civility he had worn in front of our families dropped instantly, revealing something cold and cruel underneath. "Let me make something very clear, Tari," he said, his voice low and sharp as broken glass. "You need to understand your place in this new arrangement. The woman I'm marrying is younger than you, more beautiful, and most importantly, she knows how to respect her husband. She doesn't question me or challenge me the way you do with your so-called modern ideas." Each word was designed to wound, and they found their mark. I felt something crack deep inside my chest, but I kept my face neutral, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. He continued, warming to his subject like a professor delivering a lecture. "You'll remain the first wife in name, but don't deceive yourself about what that means. She will have my attention, my affection, my time. You had your chance, and you failed to appreciate what you had." My throat felt tight, but I managed to ask, "What's her name?" Cola's smirk widened into something uglier. "You'll find out soon enough. In fact, you'll meet her properly at the wedding. You are expected to attend, of course. It would be bad form if the first wife wasn't there to welcome the second, wouldn't it?" He laughed then, a sound that would haunt my dreams for weeks to come, and walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway of what suddenly felt like a stranger's house. That night I lay awake in our bed, though it hardly felt like our bed anymore, listening to Kola snore peacefully beside me. How could he sleep so soundly after detonating my entire existence? But I realized with painful clarity that for him, nothing had exploded. His world was expanding, improving, getting better. Only mine was being destroyed. Around 3 in the morning, when his snoring reached its deepest rhythm, I slipped out of bed with my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would wake him. His phone lay on the nightstand, charging. He had always been careless with security, never imagining I would violate his privacy because in 7 years I never had. Why would I? I had trusted him completely. The passcode was our wedding anniversary, a detail that felt like mockery now. My hands shook as I unlocked it and began scrolling through his messages. What I found there transformed my grief into something sharper, more focused. Hotel receipts dating back 8 months. Messages to someone saved as consultant. Dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, filled with intimate details, future plans, and discussions about me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. Voice notes where he bragged to his friends about upgrading and teaching Tari her place once and for all. But it was one particular message that made my blood run cold. Make sure Tari never finds out what we did. Once the property papers are processed, she won't be able to do anything about it anyway. Property papers. My mind raced. What property papers? I took screenshots of everything, my fingers moving with mechanical precision even as silent tears streamed down my face. I emailed them to myself from 3 different accounts, uploaded them to a cloud drive, and carefully replaced his phone exactly as I had found it. Then I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed into a towel, muffling the sound so he wouldn't wake and discover what I now knew. The next morning I made breakfast as usual. I smiled when Kola came downstairs. I asked about his meetings for the day. I played the role of the dutiful, compliant wife while my mind spun with questions and plans. If he noticed anything different, he gave no sign. Why would he? In his mind, I was already defeated, already broken, already resigned to my fate as the diminished first wife. He had no idea that behind my calm exterior, I was gathering my strength for war. Over the following days, I became a detective in my own life. I paid attention to his patterns, when he left, when he returned, the times he claimed to be in meetings, but his phone showed he was elsewhere. And one Thursday afternoon, when he announced he had a late meeting with a client, I did something I had never done in 7 years of marriage. Followed him. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached as I maintained a careful distance through Lagos traffic, watching his car wind through streets I didn't recognize. He drove to an upscale neighborhood in Lekki, to a modern apartment complex I had never seen before. And then she emerged from the building to meet him, and the betrayal became a living, breathing thing. Miriam. The second wife was Miriam, my former friend. The woman who had shown up in Lagos 6 months ago, crying about how hard life had been, how she needed help. The woman I had welcomed into my home, lent money to, consoled. The woman who was now kissing my husband in broad daylight with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. I sat in my car, watching them disappear into the building together, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just infidelity, it was conspiracy. They had planned this, plotted it, executed it while smiling in my face. Miriam had sat at my dining table, accepted my kindness, borrowed my money, all while planning to take my place. The hurt was still there, raw and bleeding, but beneath it grew something harder, colder, more determined. They wanted to destroy me. Fine. But I wouldn't go down without a fight. I took photographs of them together. I noted the apartment address. I documented the time. Then I drove to a nearby cafe and sat there for hours, drinking coffee I couldn't taste, waiting for my hands to stop shaking enough to think clearly. When they finally steadied, I took out my phone and called a number my friend had given me months ago during a casual conversation about legal matters. The woman who answered had a crisp, professional voice that somehow made me feel less alone. Barrister Okafor's office. How may I help you? Within 30 minutes, I had an appointment scheduled for the next day. That night I couldn't eat dinner. I told Kola I had a headache and went to bed early, but sleep was impossible. Instead I lay in the dark planning. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Barrister Okafor was a woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair, sharp eyes, and an air of competence that immediately put me at ease. I sat in her office and told her everything. The announcement, the humiliation, Miriam, the cryptic messages about property papers. I showed her the screenshots, the photographs, the evidence I had gathered. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, her expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When I finished, she sat back in her leather chair and studied me with an intensity that felt like an X-ray. Mrs. Adeyemi, before we proceed, I need to ask you a direct question. What do you want from this situation? Do you want justice through the legal system? Or do you want revenge? I thought about that question for a long moment. Justice seemed clean, proper, righteous. Revenge seemed dark and dangerous. But as I sat there remembering Kola's smirk, Miriam's betrayal, the applause of my own family as they celebrated my replacement, I realized something important. I want both, I said clearly. I want him to face legal consequences for whatever he's done, and I want him to understand fully what he's lost. Can you help me do that? Barrister Okafor smiled then, a small, knowing smile that made me feel like I had just gained a powerful ally. Mrs. Adeyemi, if you're willing to be patient, strategic, and very, very careful, then yes, I can help you do exactly that. But first, we need to find out what these property papers are about. That evening, while Kola was out at another supposed meeting, I went into his home office. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear it. His desk was usually locked, but I had watched him open it enough times to know where he kept the key, taped under the bottom drawer of all places. Inside, I found a folder labeled Property Transfer Documents. My hands trembled as I opened it and began to read. Property transfer papers. For our house. The house we had bought together with our combined savings. The house that had both our names on the deed. He was trying to transfer it solely into his name. Page after page of legal documents, and there on the final signature page was my name, signed in handwriting that looked almost like mine but wasn't quite right. He had forged my signature. My husband had committed fraud to steal my home. I stood there in his office, holding the evidence of his betrayal, and felt the last remnants of my love for him crumble into dust. This wasn't just about taking a second wife. This wasn't just about choosing someone else. This was systematic destruction. He wanted to leave me with nothing. No marriage, no home, no security, no dignity. I photographed every single page with shaking hands, emailed them to Barrister Okafor, and carefully returned everything exactly as I had found it. That night I drove to an empty parking lot and screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw, pounding the steering wheel, letting out 7 years of swallowed complaints, ignored needs, and diminished dreams. I cried until I had no tears left, my makeup running down my face in dark rivers. And then, when the storm finally passed and I sat there in the silence, I made a vow. You want a second wife. Fine. But you won't get the ending you're expecting. The next few weeks required acting skills I didn't know I possessed. At home, I became the picture of resigned acceptance. When Kola talked about wedding preparations, I nodded pleasantly. When his mother called to discuss what I should wear to the ceremony, I listened patiently. When Kola handed me an invitation to his own wedding, with my name listed as first wife as if this was an honor, I thanked him calmly. All the while, I was documenting everything, recording conversations, photographing documents, building a case that would be absolutely airtight. The worst moment came at a family meeting 2 weeks before the wedding. Kola's entire family was there, along with Miriam, who sat beside him with her hand possessively on his arm. Kola stood up to make a toast, and what he said made my stomach turn. I want to thank all of you for supporting this decision, he began. My first wife, Tari, has been adequate, but she lacks ambition. She's content with mediocrity. A man of my stature deserves more, deserves a woman who understands my worth and my potential. The room murmured agreement while I sat there, my face a mask of calm, dying inside. That evening, as I drove home alone, Kola stayed behind for more wedding planning, My phone buzzed with a voice note. From Miriam. I almost deleted it without listening, but something made me press play. Her voice, dripping with false sweetness, filled my car. Tari, I know this must be difficult for you, but you should know that once I marry Kola, things are going to change significantly. He's made it clear that I'll be managing the household finances going forward. You've had your time. Now it's mine. I hope you can accept your new position gracefully. I listened to it 3 times, each word fueling the cold determination growing in my chest. Then I saved it, added it to my evidence folder, and drove to Barrister Okafor's office. I need to accelerate our timeline, I told her. I want to file everything 1 week before his wedding. Maximum impact. She looked at me carefully, then nodded. Then we need to move quickly. There's something else you should know. I've been doing some research into Miriam's background. She has significant debts. Credit cards, personal loans, even some legal issues with a former employer. She's not marrying your husband for love, Mrs. Adeyemi. She's marrying him for money. That revelation led to more digging, and what we discovered was stunning. Miriam and Kola had been systematically draining our joint accounts for months, transferring money into an account I didn't have access to. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, always just below the threshold that would trigger bank alerts. They had stolen from me while planning to humiliate me. The rage I felt was so pure, so cold that it actually calmed me. Emotion wouldn't help me now. Only strategy would. With Barrister Okafor's guidance, I took control of what I could legally access. I moved my rightful share of our joint funds into a separate account. Not stealing, just protecting what was mine. I documented every unauthorized transfer Kola had made. I gathered bank statements, receipt records, everything that showed the financial manipulation. And then I waited for the perfect moment to act. 3 weeks before the wedding, on a Monday morning, Kola's card was declined at the gas station. Then at the grocery store. Then at the restaurant where he had taken Miriam for lunch. I was at home when he burst through the door. His face red with fury and confusion. Tari, what's happening with our accounts? My cards aren't working. I looked up from my book with perfectly crafted concern. Really? That's strange. Have you called the bank? Maybe there's been some kind of error. He spent the next 2 hours on the phone with the bank, growing increasingly agitated as they explained that the joint accounts had been legally restructured and that unauthorized transfers had been flagged. By the time he hung up, his hands were shaking. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. The wedding is in 3 weeks. The venue needs final payment. The caterers, the band, everything needs to be paid now. He looked at me suspiciously. You didn't do something, did you? Me? I asked innocently. Kola, you know I don't understand all these financial matters. You've always handled everything. Maybe you should speak to your consultant about it. The emphasis I placed on consultant was slight, but I saw something flicker in his eyes, the first hint of real fear. Over the next few days, his carefully constructed plans began to collapse like a house of cards. The wedding venue called to say they were canceling due to non-payment. The caterer demanded money up front. The band backed out. And through it all, Miriam's voice grew shriller and more demanding. I was in the kitchen when I heard them arguing, her voice carrying through the walls. What kind of man can't even pay for his own wedding? You told me you had money. You promised me we'd have a luxurious life. Was everything a lie? Kola's response was desperate, pleading. It's just temporary. There's some confusion with the banks. Once I sort it out. But Miriam cut him off. Sort it out. The wedding is in 2 weeks. This is humiliating. Everyone knows about this wedding. What am I supposed to tell people? While they fought, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message was brief. We need to talk. About Kola. He's been lying to both of us. I stared at that message for a long moment before responding. An hour later, I was sitting in a coffee shop across from a young woman named Gloria who had a story that would change everything. She was maybe 25, pretty, and looked absolutely terrified. I don't know if you'll believe me, Gloria began, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. "But Kola and we've been seeing each other for almost a year. He promised he was going to leave you and marry me. He borrowed money from me for his business, said we'd start a life together. Then suddenly, about 4 months ago, he ghosted me. Stopped answering my calls, blocked my number. I found out through a friend that he was planning to marry someone else, this Miriam woman. So she paused, looking ashamed. I started blackmailing him. I have videos, messages, everything. I just wanted my money back. I should have been shocked, but by this point, nothing could surprise me about Kola's capacity for deception. Instead, I saw an opportunity. Gloria, what if I told you there's a better way to get your justice? What if, instead of blackmailing him for small amounts he'll never actually pay, you helped me build a case against him? A legal case that would have real consequences. Her eyes widened. What kind of case? I leaned forward. The kind that ends with him facing criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and financial manipulation. I can't promise you'll get all your money back, but I can promise he'll face justice. Are you interested? What Gloria gave me was devastating. Screenshots of every conversation where Kola had promised her marriage, love, a future. Bank transfers showing the money she had lent him that he never repaid. And most damaging of all, videos. Intimate videos that Kola had no idea she had saved, where he talked about his plans to get rid of Tari and take everything she has. When I brought this new evidence to Barrister Okafor, she actually whistled low. Mrs. Adeyemi, with this, we have more than enough. I can file within 48 hours if you're ready. Not yet, I said, surprising myself with how strategic I had become. Wait until exactly 1 week before the wedding. I want maximum impact. She nodded approvingly. You've learned well. Timing is everything in these situations. The next few days were perhaps the hardest of my life. Kola grew increasingly desperate as his world fell apart, and part of me, the part that had loved him for 7 years, wanted to comfort him, to fix things, to make everything okay. But I reminded myself of his smirk, his cruelty, his systematic plan to destroy me. Held firm. 1 week before the scheduled wedding, on a Tuesday morning, a courier arrived at our door. Kola signed for the package, probably expecting wedding-related documents. Instead, he opened it to find a legal summons. I watched from the kitchen doorway as the color drained from his face, as his hands began to shake, as he read page after page of charges. Petition for legal separation, evidence of signature forgery, misappropriation of joint funds, fraud, psychological abuse, breach of fiduciary duty. Every crime meticulously documented. Every accusation backed by irrefutable evidence. Tari, he whispered, looking up at me with something like shock. What is this? I walked over calmly, looked at the papers in his trembling hands, and met his eyes. Those are the consequences of your choices, Kola. You wanted to humiliate me, steal from me, replace me. Now you get to face what that actually costs. His face went through a series of transformations. Shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, fear. You can't do this. We can work it out. I'll call off the wedding. We'll go to counseling. Please, Tari, just. I had 7 years to work things out, I interrupted, my voice steady and cold. You chose this path. You announced my replacement in front of both our families. You mocked me publicly. You forged my signature. You stole from our joint accounts. You planned to take my home. And you did it all while smiling in my face. No, Kola. There's no working this out. There's only justice now. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with those papers clutched in his shaking hands, finally understanding that the woman he had underestimated was far stronger than he had ever imagined. The news spread through our community like wildfire. Kola Adeyemi, respected businessman, was being investigated for fraud and forgery. The whispers started immediately. In the markets, at church, in office buildings across Lagos. His business partners began distancing themselves, worried about being associated with scandal. Phone calls went unanswered. Meetings were cancelled. The social standing he had been so proud of crumbled in a matter of days. And Miriam, she vanished like smoke. Her phone was disconnected. The apartment where she had been living was suddenly empty. Kola drove there repeatedly, standing outside like a lost child, unable to comprehend how quickly his perfect plan had unraveled. Through Gloria, who had maintained some connections in their social circle, I learned that Miriam had actually taken the last of Kola's accessible cash before disappearing, claimed it was compensation for emotional distress when the wedding was cancelled. She had never intended to stand by him when things got difficult. She had been after money and status, and when both evaporated, so did she. 5 days before what would have been his wedding day, Kola came home to find me in the living room, reading. He looked terrible, unshaven, his clothes wrinkled. His eyes red from crying or lack of sleep or both. He fell to his knees in front of me, actually sobbing. "Tari, please. I was stupid. I was arrogant. I was wrong about everything. Miriam used me. She took everything and left. But you're my real wife. My partner. Can't we start over? Please just drop the charges, withdraw the petition. I'll do anything. Anything." I looked down at this man who had once been my entire world. This man who had promised me forever and then tried to discard me like trash, and I felt nothing but a distant, sad pity. "Kola, do you know what hurts most? It's not that you wanted someone else. People fall out of love. It happens. What hurts is how you did it. You humiliated me publicly. You mocked me to our families. You tried to steal my home. You forged my signature. You treated me with contempt and cruelty. And even now, you're not actually sorry for what you did. You're just sorry there are consequences." "I am sorry," he insisted, reaching for my hands. Pulled them away. "Please, Tari. I made a terrible mistake. Don't leave me like this." I stood up, and he remained on his knees, looking up at me with desperate eyes. I walked to the drawer where I had saved the wedding invitation he had given me weeks ago. The invitation with my name listed as first wife. I dropped it in his lap. "You made your choice, Kola. This was what you wanted. Now live with it." The legal proceedings moved forward with brutal efficiency. Barrister Okafor had built such a comprehensive case that Kola's attorney advised him to settle rather than go to trial. The forgery alone could have resulted in criminal prosecution. The evidence of financial manipulation, the video confessions Gloria had provided, the pattern of abuse documented in recorded conversations. It was overwhelming. Kola had no choice but to accept the terms we offered. In the final settlement, I was awarded full ownership of our house. The joint assets were divided, but because of the unauthorized transfers and documented theft, I received the majority share plus damages for emotional distress and attempted fraud. Kola was also ordered to pay a significant fine for the forged signatures. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, looked directly at him during the final hearing and said, "Mr. Adeyemi, you are extraordinarily fortunate that your wife is merciful. In another courtroom, you would be facing criminal prosecution and possible jail time. I suggest you use this as an opportunity for deep reflection on how you treat people, particularly the women in your life." Kola walked out of that courtroom a broken man. I later heard through the inevitable gossip network that he had lost his job. His employer deciding they couldn't keep someone involved in such a public scandal. He moved into a cheap apartment in a less desirable part of Lagos. His car was repossessed. His social circle evaporated. And Miriam. She had not only blocked him on every platform but had apparently moved to Abuja and was already engaged to someone else, a politician with actual money. The irony wasn't lost on me. As for me, I began the slow, painful, beautiful work of rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. There were mornings when I woke up and forgot, for just a moment, that everything had changed, and then reality would crash back in, heavy and overwhelming. There were days when I questioned every decision, wondering if I had been too harsh, too unforgiving. There were nights when the loneliness felt like it would swallow me whole. But there were also moments of extraordinary lightness. The first time I rearranged the furniture without asking permission. The afternoon I painted the bedroom walls a color I loved and Kola had hated. The evening I invited friends over and laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in months. Each small act of autonomy, each choice made solely for myself, was a step toward becoming whole again. I started a small business, an online boutique selling African-inspired jewelry and accessories, something I had always dreamed of but had never pursued because Kola had dismissed it as not serious enough. Within 3 months it was profitable. Within 6 I had hired 2 employees. The work filled me with a sense of purpose and pride I hadn't felt in years. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an email that would change my trajectory again. An organization that ran women's empowerment conferences had somehow heard my story. Probably through the social media posts I had started making about financial literacy and recognizing manipulation in relationships. They wanted me to speak at their upcoming event. My first instinct was to decline. The thought of standing on a stage, exposing my pain to strangers, seemed unbearable. But then I thought about all the women who might be going through something similar, who might feel as trapped and hopeless as I once had. If my story could help even one person find their strength, wouldn't it be worth the discomfort? The conference was held in a beautiful hotel in Victoria Island. I stood backstage, my carefully prepared speech suddenly feeling inadequate, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But when I walked out to that podium and saw the faces in the audience, hundreds of women of all ages, all backgrounds, all looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and hope, something settled in my chest. Belonged here. This was where I was meant to be. I didn't share every sordid detail. I didn't try to publicly destroy Kola further. That wasn't the point. Instead, I talked about the journey from silence to strength. I spoke about recognizing your worth, about the importance of financial independence, about gathering evidence and building support systems. I discussed how betrayal, as devastating as it is, can sometimes be the catalyst for discovering who you really are beneath the roles you've been playing. The hardest part, I told them, my voice growing stronger with each word, wasn't the betrayal itself, though that was crushing. It was realizing that I had made myself small. I had accepted less than I deserved. I had believed that my value was determined by whether someone chose to keep me or replace me. But that's not how worth works. Your value is inherent. It's non-negotiable. It exists whether anyone else recognizes it or not. And the moment you truly understand that, everything changes. The applause when I finished was thunderous. Women came up afterward to share their own stories, to ask for advice, to simply hug me and say thank you. I felt a sense of purpose I had never experienced in my marriage. An understanding that my pain had been transformed into something meaningful, something that could light the way for others walking through similar darkness. As I was leaving the hotel, gathering my things and preparing to drive home to my peaceful plant-filled house that was finally, completely mine, a staff member approached me hesitantly. "Ma, excuse me. There's someone outside asking to see you. He says He says you used to be married." My heart sank. I had known this moment might come, but I had hoped to be spared it. Still, I couldn't hide forever. I nodded and walked outside into the thick Lagos evening. Kola stood by a beat-up Toyota that looked nothing like the luxury vehicles he used to drive. He had aged years in the months since I had last seen him. His face was drawn, his clothes cheap and ill-fitting, his entire posture one of defeat. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he cleared his throat. "Tari, I heard you speak. I didn't have a ticket, but I stood outside the doors and listened." His voice was rough, broken. "You were magnificent. You were always magnificent, and I was too blind, too arrogant, too stupid to see it." I said nothing, just waited. I had said everything I needed to say months ago. "I destroyed the best thing in my life," he continued, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. "I thought I deserved more, when the truth is I never deserved you in the first place. Miriam used me. Gloria used me. But you actually loved me, and I threw it away for nothing." He took a shaky breath. "I'm not asking for another chance. I know that's impossible. I just needed you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did, what I lost. And I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it." He paused, struggling with his next words. Is there any possibility that someday, not now, I know, but maybe eventually we could be friends? That you could forgive me enough for that? I looked at this man who had once been my entire world, who had promised me forever and then systematically tried to destroy me, who had been brought low by his own cruelty and arrogance. I felt compassion for him. I was surprised to discover that I did. The rage had burned itself out, leaving something gentler but no less firm behind. Kola, I said softly, I don't wish you ill. I genuinely hope you learn from this experience, that you become a better person, that you treat the next woman in your life with the respect and dignity you failed to show me. But we will never be friends. We will never be in each other's lives again. You taught me something invaluable, though I wish I had learned it differently. He looked at me with desperate, hopeful eyes. What did I teach you? I smiled then, a genuine smile born of hard-won wisdom and self-knowledge. You taught me my worth, Kola. And losing me was the price you paid for that lesson. I turned and walked toward my car. My car, parked in a spot I had earned, paid for with money from the business I had built from nothing. Behind me I could hear him crying, but I didn't look back. That chapter was closed. The story ahead was mine to write, and it would be beautiful. As I drove home through the familiar chaos of Lagos traffic, my phone buzzed with messages from women who had been at the conference, thanking me, asking questions, sharing their own stories of survival and strength. I thought about the community I was building, the purpose I had found, the woman I was still becoming. And I realized something profound. Kola hadn't destroyed me when he announced that second wife. He had accidentally freed me. He had shattered a cage I didn't even know I was living in. That night, I stood on my balcony looking out at the city lights, a glass of wine in my hand, feeling more at peace than I had in years. My story wasn't a fairy tale with a prince and a happily ever after. It was something better. It was a story of a woman who saved herself, who claimed her own power, who refused to let cruelty define her worth. And that, I thought, raising my glass to the stars above Lagos, is exactly what I did next.